Hello, everybody, and from the foothills of Colorado, welcome to Raiders in 30, the podcast for the thinking fan. It's our first episode. Let me tell you a little about what we do. We're going to do a quick episode, 30 minutes at a time, just hammer the points, get in, get out. At the same time, what I mean by the podcast for the thinking fan, if you're looking for reactionary takes, if you're looking for bogus media hype that's not true, that never was true, this is not the place for you. There's plenty of shows where you can find that. Feel free, go enjoy. You'll find them no problem. Here, we're talking about what's real, both the good and the bad. We're going to talk about realistic scenarios. We're going to talk about stuff that was never going to happen. We're going to talk about things that I hope happen, stuff that I believe will happen. And each week what we're going to do, I want to hit 3 topics at a time. We're going to keep it very simple. Don't want to go all over the place. Don't want to get dragged out here and there. Keeping it simple, tackling 3 topics. This week, the 3 things we're going to talk about. Number 1, we're going to talk about Tom Brady to the Patriots and how it was never real. And the reason it was never real is because we have a damn good quarterback. Second, we're going to talk a little about free agency. And then third, we're going to talk about trusting the plan. We're going to talk about what happens when you trust a plan and what it is we've seen so far from that plan and what I expect to see going forward. So let's get this thing kicked off. Insert whatever fancy opening theme song I have here. We don't have it yet, but it's going to be coming, and I'm sure it's going to be damn good. But in the meantime, let's just go. Tom Brady to the Raiders was never real. Those of you who know me online, trolling around those Raider boards, you know that I've been screaming this for months. It was never real. Tom Brady was never coming here, okay? There's a number of reasons for that. Let's start here. Number 1, Tom Brady is 42. He's going to be 43 in August. Tom Brady, greatest quarterback of all time. Nobody can take that away from him. But there's something we need to make perfectly clear. Tom Brady isn't that good anymore, and Derek Carr's a better quarterback. Now, I know a bunch of you probably just spit Monster Energy drink all over the dashboard of your 2001 Beamer, but listen to me. Tom Brady, last year, okay, was the 22nd ranked passer, and we're going to talk about some next-gen stats here, okay? We're not looking at the basic stuff. We're going next-gen stats on you. Tom Brady's passer rating was 22nd. Derek Carr, the quarterback that some of you just hate so much for whatever reason, was 9th. Brady 22, Derek Carr 9. That stat alone doesn't tell the whole story, but we're going to dive into that. First, let's start with Derek Carr being 9th. Here's the 8 guys who are above Derek Carr. Okay, in no particular order. Jimmy G, Mahomes, Stafford, Wilson, Cousins, Jackson, Breeze, Tannehill. First off, let's look at a couple of those guys, okay? We don't have to talk about Mahomes. We don't have to talk about Wilson, okay? Those guys, they're elites. They're going to be some of the greats going forward. But look at everyone on this list and look at what they have in common. Do most of the people on here not have better wide receiver groups than Derek Carr? And some of you are even stopping and saying, well, hold on a second. What about Ryan Tannehill? Maybe Jimmy Garoppolo? Those 2 guys, those receiver groups, they're not much better. They might not even be any better than what we had when we're healthy. You know what those 2 have that we don't? I'll give you a second here. It's not a hard one, but let me give you a second. Think about that. Do those 2 teams not have elite defenses? Did the San Francisco 49ers not have the best defense in the league this year? Did the Titans not have a top 10 defense? And did the Titans not have a running back that all of a sudden was taken off for 200 yards a game at the end of the year? Meanwhile, our stud Jacobs was hurt. I think he missed 3 of the last 4 or 5 games. Do you think maybe that had a part to play with it? Of course it did. But I know a lot of you aren't ready to admit that maybe our defense being terrible and maybe not having wide receivers was part of the problem. So let's talk about a few more things. Let's talk accuracy. Passing accuracy, Carr 2nd, Brady 30th. Poor throws, Brady 3rd, Carr 28th. Bad throw percentage, Brady 4th, Carr 31st. Anyone can go look these stats up. You don't have to take my word for it, okay? Look at any advanced passing statistics. Go to Next Gen Stats, go to PFF's advanced passing statistics. All of the information is there. You might not want to admit it to yourself. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make the statistics untrue. And by the way, before anyone talks about our elite offensive line, and I do love them, it's a great O-line, they were tied in pocket time at 2.5 seconds. Simply put, there's no excuse. Even if you think Tom Brady's receiving group was bad, and I'll admit it wasn't worse than the Raiders group. At best, it was even with them. There's no comparison between the seasons they had. But I do want to talk about something that I know people are thinking about right now, because this is something that always pops up. You can talk to Carr haters all day. You could tell them about the completion percentage. You could tell them where they rank in the next-gen stats. You can tell them everything Derek Carr has done well, and you can say, look at the defenses he's done it with. How about the fact that his 6 years in the league, every single year, Derek Carr's wide receivers have been top 5 in dropped passes. I'm going to repeat that stat. Every single year that Derek Carr has been in the league, his wide receivers have led the league in dropped passes. 3 or 4 times it was second overall. I know that off the top of my head. But what does every Carr hater come back to? What do we get every single time you bring up all the great Carr stats? Very simple. Derek Carr doesn't throw deep. All he does is dump off. That's the only thing he does. Dump off, dump off, dump off. Well, let's take a look at that. Number one, go back and watch some 2015, 2016, and 2017 before the injury at Denver. Go watch Derek Carr then when he had a wide receiver group that he fully trusted. Look at those teams and then tell me if Derek Carr doesn't throw deep. That's number one. Number two, Jon Gruden came in with his West Coast offense, which is designed for mostly short passes. Let's not ignore that. It matters. But more than that, I want to look at number three. We're talking about next-gen stats, right? Let's take a look at something air yards, all right? Air yards. Completed air yards per completion. Derek Carr ranked 25th, Brady ranked 15th. By the way, the difference was 0.6, but nonetheless 25th to 15th. Okay? Now, completed air yards per pass attempt. So now we're going per attempt. Carr was 18th, Brady was 21st, but again, a difference of 0.2, negligible. And then there's this stat. Are you ready for this one? Yards after catch. Derek Carr's receivers in yards after catch were fourth. Fourth in the league, Brady was 10th. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that for yourself. Okay, time's up. What that means, Derek Carr is not just dumping it to people who are covered 2 yards off the line of scrimmage. When Derek Carr throws a 3-yard pass, he is doing it to somebody who is open, who has a lane, who has the opportunity to take that little pass and run with it. A lot of people don't seem to understand what the West Coast offense is. It got lost somewhere along the way. It's basically because everyone plays Madden, something you'll hear us talk about quite a bit on the show. You're going to hear the Madden bros. You're going to hear me talk about that Madden logic. You're going to hear me talk about the modern fan whose understanding of the NFL is what they see from Madden. Okay, where basically you could start a new season, you make a bunch of trades, you get 10 picks, you can turn every player into a superstar, and every single play you can just run verticals, and as long as you have a couple of fast wide receivers, they'll sprint all the way out, and you'll throw 7 touchdowns a game, you'll break every record, you get 26 sacks a game. It's a great time. Guess what? Real life doesn't work that way. A lot of you probably don't know how real life works. That's another story overall. Here's the point. The West Coast offense, the philosophy behind the West Coast offense, and those of you smiling, you know what I'm about to say. The idea was this. Somebody looked at it, Bill Walsh specifically, looked at it and he said, you know what? If you run for a 4-yard gain, people think it's a success. But if you pass for a 4-yard gain, people think it's a failure. And this guy, being brilliant, just said, well, wait a minute. Either way, it's a 4-yard gain. And if people are going to give me 4 yards because they don't think it's a successful play, then I'm going to go ahead and take it. Guess what? That's the West Coast offense. The idea is not to score a touchdown on every single play. Okay, we're not the old 70s Raiders with Cliff Branch where Al Davis's philosophy was screw it. Don't get the first down, get the touchdown. There's something to be said for that. But that's not what we're running right now. The idea behind this system, okay, get yards. Just chip away. Yards, yards, yards. 4 here, 6 there, 7 there, 3 here, 5 here, and run those 10, 12 play drives where you took half a quarter off the clock, touchdown. That's the goal. And here's the thing. We ran that well last year. The only thing missing was the touchdowns, and obviously that's a big part of it, but that's why we need another receiver, a big-bodied receiver or 2, and we'll get to that. In fact, this is a great time to move right on to our free agents. We had some success in free agency. And hands down, the biggest part of that success, we all know where I'm going with this, Cori Littleton, the best coverage linebacker in football, coming over for what is $11.5 million a year. Hands down, the most underrated signing of the offseason. And you know what? It's still a big signing, but it's such a good one that it's not being talked about enough. And something we did, or we didn't do, that's what I'm going to say. Something we didn't do that I'm happy about. We didn't go out and sign Byron Jones for the 16.5, 17 million a year he got. Byron Jones is a good cornerback, but my God, he's not worth 17 million a year. Take a look at some past signings. When you sign free agent cornerbacks approaching 30 and you start throwing big money at them, there's not much history to prove that that's a successful move. And look what we did with that Byron Jones money. For the 16.5, 17 million a year the Dolphins are paying him, we signed Quee and we signed Littleton for 19 a year. We completely revamped our linebacker group. We took it from probably the weakest in football, if not one of the weakest, but maybe the weakest. We took it from that, and we immediately made it one of the stronger groups. And guess what? We're not even done. Very good chance we go ahead and grab another outside linebacker in the draft, and we can only imagine that. But we're going to do a mock draft next week. I'm excited to get into that. Next week's going to be our mock draft. But if we add another linebacker in that draft, we immediately have one of the best linebacker groups in the entire game. But let's look beyond that. Let's look at some of the other moves we made. Our defensive line had shown big improvement this year. We went from 13 sacks to I think we were in the 30s somewhere. And we really owe a lot of that to Max Crosby, of course, just absolute stud out of the 4th round. Everyone listening to this loves Crosby. That's something everyone in Raider Nation agrees on. Nothing to dispute there. Cleve Ferrell, I know some people were a little down on him. Listen. You have to understand that, one, this guy is not a pure pass rusher. He is not the guy who's going to come in and get you 15 sacks. That's not what he does. But number two, keep in mind, he got sick at the beginning of the season. Guy lost a good 20 pounds. He was not himself for the first half of the year. Compare his second half to his first half. That guy you saw in the second half is more of who you're going to get going forward. And look, he's only going to improve. We know he's a hard worker. One of the reasons Mayock loved him, one of the reasons Gruden loved him. They're bringing in a certain kind of player. And Cleve Ferrell is going to be one of those guys. And you know what? Him and Crosby are going to be setting the edge for us for the next decade, hopefully. That's good. But here's the thing, that interior D-line was pretty good as well. Hurst doing a great job, one of the better, more unheralded D tackles in the league. And we got a couple other good guys in there, Hankins. But the most underrated signing I think the Raiders had, I said Littleton was the most underrated signing overall because of how good he is. But I think the most underrated signing the Raiders had was Collins, okay? Malik Collins is a guy who he gets double teamed on almost every play. If you go watch some highlights of him in Dallas, okay? And there was actually a great breakdown on YouTube. Silver and Black Films presents, which, by the way, as a Raider fan, if you're not listening to that yet, my God, you are missing out. Hands down, the best Raider YouTube site, okay? And I'm hoping to become the best Raider YouTube site, but I'll tell you, I'm nowhere close, and it will take me a long time to get to where Silver and Black Films is, because that guy does an outstanding job breaking down free agent signings, breaking down current players, our strengths, our weaknesses. And if you haven't checked out his video on Malik Collins yet, I got to tell you, you're missing out. So by all means, check that out. And you'll see, we're talking about somebody who's going to take a lot of attention on that off from the offensive line, which is going to free up our guys on the end. Add in a guy like Nassib, who can go ahead and just bounce all over the place. Okay, here's a guy, you can line him up outside, inside. You can mess around with him a little bit. What that gives you, it gives you a D-line of Crosby, Hurst, Collins, Ferrell, and then you've got Nassib lining up anywhere you need him to fill in, plus the rest of the depth we have. Honestly, we're looking pretty good, and who knows, I'm not going to be surprised if they add a D-tackle like a Kinlaw if he's available, but again, we'll cover that next week when we start looking at drafts. Beyond those guys, I also think Heath is an underrated signing, okay? Heath's not a stud. He's not someone who's going to come in here and just immediately be the best safety in the league. But he's a good player. He's depth there. And by the way, one of the biggest problems we had last year was depth. A lot of people think it was just a lack of talent, and there was obviously some of that, no mistaking. However, we lacked depth at a lot of key positions. As soon as Burfict was done, it was clear we had nobody who could fill that spot. Once Ty hurt the foot with the plantar fasciitis, excuse me, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that right, so just pretend I did. Once that happened, we had nobody who could step up at the wide receiver spot. When we lost Renfrow, Hunter Renfrow got hurt in that Jets game. Okay, so I'm going to say he was out for 4 games. I know he got hurt during the game, but I think it was early in the second, and he had no business being in the game the rest of the time, okay? Hunter Renfrow missed 4 games. By the way, we went 0-4 in those games. Do you think the two might have something to do with each other? Probably. But the biggest problem, I don't believe, is that we didn't have a wide receiver one, though that did hurt. But the problem is we just didn't have that wide receiver depth. Once those guys were hurt, we had nobody to plug in. We were plugging in guys like Khalil and Doss. Great camp story. It was fun to see him on Hard Knocks, but he's not a guy who was going to come in and be a wide receiver 2 for us. Okay, Zay Jones. I'm actually okay holding on to Zay and seeing what we can do with him, but as a guy who's maybe a wide receiver 5 for us, not as a guy who needs to step in and be the wide receiver 1. Rico Gaffer is a name. My wife's a Giants fan. Okay, she cheers for the Raiders just, to keep things peaceful in the house. But at the end of the day, when Rico Gaffer caught a touchdown pass, I forget which game it was, but he caught about a 40-yard pass. They said Rico Gafford. She looked over at me and just said, who the hell is Rico Gafford? She couldn't even believe this was someone who was starting at wide receiver for us. The point being, the real problem we had last year was depth. So a lot of these names, they might not be monster names. Littleton's a huge name, and I think Quee's a great name too. Some of the other guys, Nassib, Heath, these might not be guys, Randall, these might not be guys who are massive names, but they give us some depth. And that's what we've been missing on this team for a little while now. If someone goes down, we've been shot. Same with, look, if Derek Carr goes down, we're screwed, okay? We go out, we get Mariota, great. No depth in the secondary? Well, you know what? Now we have the safeties we have on the roster. One of them is probably not making it out of camp, especially because I think we're going to end up drafting another. Okay? We have depth now, and that depth is going to help us throughout the season because something people never remember, and I'm as guilty of this as any fan, something we never remember, people are going to get hurt. Someone was talking about, hey, what if we went out and got Clay Matthews for a year? And I heard a lot of people, hey, what are we going to do with Clay Matthews? Come on now. We're going to have enough linebackers. We're going to start this guy, that guy. We're not going to need him on the edge with Crosby and Farrell. What are we going to do with him? And that sounds great until it's week 4 and Crosby's out, okay, and the Nassib's hurt and Quee's out for a game. And now we need someone to be able to step in. You cannot underestimate the importance of depth. Again, this is not Madden. You can't just go into the settings and turn off the injuries. It doesn't work that way. Depth is important, and what we've seen out of free agency, take care of one of the 2 weakest positions we had, linebacker and wide receiver. We short up linebacker, that's good. Get some depth in the O-line, get some depth in the secondary. Sign a guy like Aguilar, get depth at the wide receiver position. Again, something that we got a hard time for was was giving Aguilar a contract. Number one, I'm higher on him than most. I think if he's used as a slot guy and not a deep guy, he'll do well. But number 2, depth. Last year, when Hunter went down, would you have been more excited about Rico Gaffer and Keelan Doss, or would you have been more excited about Nelson Aguilar? If you didn't answer Aguilar, you're either lying or you're kind of dumb, either or. The Raiders also need some additional depth at offensive line. I know they got Cush, but they'll probably fix that in the draft as well. Now, moving on to the last point here. I talked earlier, I said I'm going to give you 3 points, and I saved the biggest one for me for last. What you're seeing right now is the 3rd year of a plan, of an actual plan. And you have to trust a plan. You can't give up on it halfway through, unless it's a terrible plan, obviously, but that's neither here nor there. I want to ask you some questions. Do you remember the calls to fire Gruden about 3 games into last year? Do you remember people saying that after we started out with the win, then we were beating Kansas City, and then they went off for 4 touchdowns in a quarter, then we got wrecked by the Vikings, and people were, fire Gruden, this is terrible, this is a joke, okay? And do you remember every single bad move, supposedly, that Jon Gruden made since he got here? Since Jon Gruden got here day one, starting with the Khalil Mack trade, and by the way, we won that trade. Next week, that's also going to be something we dive into. We're going to dive into the Mack trade in addition to a mock draft. But do you remember what the media said about that trade? I remember. I was in Japan when that broke, okay? And I remember seeing it, and I took time to read every article I could find about how this was terrible. Jon Gruden's an idiot. It was the worst thing anyone had ever done. It was the worst trade in history. He was terrible. He should be out the door already. Well, I have a simple question. I have a simple question as it pertains to the plan. I have a simple question as it pertains to Jon Gruden. I have a simple question as it pertains to the media. I have a simple question as it pertains to Mike Mayock. Has anything that anyone in the media or the more inept parts of the fan base, has anything they've said been correct in relation to anything the Raiders have done since Jon Gruden got here? They said the Khalil Mack trade was a disaster. We won it. They said the Cooper trade was a bad trade. We won it. I know Abram, we've only seen him one game, but let's be real. Everyone is excited about Abram. And even if we didn't do that trade, any one of you want to pay $100 million for Amari Cooper? The answer is no. Again, unless you're playing Madden with the cap off. Otherwise, you know that's a terrible deal and you know it's going to sink the Cowboys along with the other crappy deals they have. So we wouldn't have signed Cooper, probably would have let him walk into a $100 million deal that he might have got from Dallas anyway, and we would have walked away with a compensatory pick, maybe a third or fourth rounder at that point. It was a good move, and they said it was a wrong move when it happened, but we won that. We were going to trade the farm for Kyler Murray last year. Remember, everyone in the media swore that was going to happen. Every mock draft had us trading up for Murray. That didn't happen. We were going to sign Tom Brady. We were going to pay him $25 million a year. He was going to come in. He was going to be the face of Vegas. He was going to be the guy who did everything. Well, that wasn't real. That never happened. We were going to sign, how many quarterbacks were we going to sign? Really go through the list and think about how many different quarterbacks we were going to sign. In no particular order, we were going to sign Cam Newton. And we're still getting those articles, by the way. We're still seeing Cam Newton. If he came to the Raiders, they were a playoff team. Quick question about Cam Newton. If Cam Newton is so good, and I know this is a sidebar, but work with me here. If Cam Newton is so good, and if he's great, and he'd bring the Raiders to the playoffs, and he's this amazing quarterback, if that's all true, I have to ask, why does nobody want him? Because clearly nobody's excited to get Cam Newton because somebody would have done it by now. The Bears, who have a horrible quarterback situation, they went out and they traded for Nick Foles. They didn't even wait to sign Cam, and they still haven't signed him to compete with anybody over there. What does that tell you about Cam Newton? But he was going to come in and be the savior. Same with Jameis Winston, right? Once the Bucs went ahead and signed Brady, then we had Jameis Winston. He was going to come over here. And even before that happened, people were calling for this. They wanted him because apparently Jon Gruden's going to trade for a quarterback who throws 30 interceptions despite having, guys like Mike Evans and Godwin, but that's another story. He was going to come in and he's going to be the savior. And by the way, another guy who's so good and yet nobody seems to want him, kind of makes you think. He was going to come in, he was going to save the day. That didn't happen either. We were going to trade for Nick Foles. We were going to go out, we were going to get Teddy Bridgewater, and we were going to pay him $25 million a year for some reason. I could sit here and I could name another dozen quarterbacks we were going to go get, and they were going to come in. Even Mariota, we were going to get him, and we did it, but he was going to come in and replace Carr. Meanwhile, he's in here, and the first thing he does day one, hey, this is Derek Carr's team, guys, come on. And that doesn't even go to mention how many times Mack and Gruden have both said, I don't know why this question keeps coming up. We think we have a great quarterback, don't know what you're talking about. How about that draft last year? Speaking of things the media got wrong, there's plenty. We could go on and on about this. How about that draft last year? F's across the board. Go back, look at grades. Just F's. The worst draft of the group, hands down, was the Raiders. D's, F's everywhere. This pick was terrible. That pick was terrible. You don't pick a running back in the first round. Who's this guy? I've never even heard of this guy. We got blasted, and they said Mayock was terrible. He had no business in there. Stephen A. Smith is on there basically saying that Mayock's clueless. He has no business doing the job. Of course, Stephen A. Smith, just double-digit IQ moron, so that's not really even worth bringing up, but that's another story. This draft is now, today, being called perhaps the best draft that any team has had in the last 10 years. Everyone stop and think, do you realize we have 9 starters on the team from that draft? Farrell, Jacobs, Abram, only played 1 game, but he's a starter for us. Mullen, Crosby, Ingold, Renfro, Moreau, Cole. All of these guys are starting on this team. A couple of them are undrafted free agents. I understand it's a punter and a fullback, but hey, look, both of them beat out 2 other guys that were already here, so you can't tell me they didn't come in and do a good job, and you can't tell me that Mayock didn't do a good job plucking them off the heap. And frankly, this doesn't even include Isaiah Johnson, who they're still pretty high on as far as I can tell. Nonetheless, we're talking about 9 starters that came out of last year's draft. I want to tell you, do a little comparison here. The Cowboys, they made the big Herschel Walker trade. If you're a younger fan and you're not familiar with that trade, take a few minutes, hop on Wikipedia, look it up. Basically, the Cowboys traded their running back Herschel Walker to the Vikings for what ended up being a legitimate, it must have been 15 or so draft picks. It was insane. And frankly, I don't even think 15 is the right number. It might have been more. They got a boatload of picks, and then by doing certain other things like not holding on to some guys that were part of the trade or releasing this guy or signing that guy, they ended up gaining some extras. Over the span of the next 2 years, what happened was the Cowboys, just with all these picks, went ahead and they this is where they got everyone. They got Smith, they got Aikman, They got Woodson, they got Russell Maryland, they got a bunch of people off the, and they didn't. By the way, they didn't even draft very well. If you go look at the drafts where they had all those picks, my God, they struck out a ton. But having those picks from the trade is what set them up for that dynasty. The year that they made the trade, I believe they went 1-15. Okay, and then the year after that, it was 7-9. The year after that, they made the playoffs, I think, at 11-5, and then the year after that was the first of the 3 Super Bowls over the next 4 years they'd win. That trade, the Herschel Walker trade, set them up for future success. Now, it's a little premature to talk about that with the Raiders, but let's just look at something. Gruden comes in 2018, okay? Mack's gone, a lot of people are gone, but we get some draft capital back for it. He brings in a guy like Mayock who knows what he's doing in the draft. What do? We go on to have one of the best drafts in the last decade. We have 9 guys who are legit NFL starters. And by the way, these aren't guys who are just starting because, well, what the hell else are we going to do at those positions? These are guys, every person I named, okay, did a great job as a rookie. The only questionable one as a rookie was Farrell, and we already went over that. The guy was sick, lost 20 pounds, and basically lost half a year. Take that away, and he had a strong season. Look at every other guy I mentioned. There's not one of those guys that are slacking. Mullen doesn't suck. Jacobs doesn't suck. Crosby doesn't suck. Renfrow doesn't suck. Moreau doesn't suck. Ingold doesn't suck. Cole doesn't suck. These are guys who are good. These are guys who contributed. If Mike Mayock, this year in the draft, right now I think the Raiders have 7 picks. 2 in the first, 3 in the third, a 4th, and maybe a 6th or 7th. You know Mayock's going to turn that into more picks. He's probably going to trade back. He's definitely going to trade back one of the first 2. I have a hunch he's going to trade back at 12. Again, we'll dive into that next week. But here's the point. You know Mike Mayock is going to turn that into extra picks. If Mike Mayock has half the success he did as last year, just imagine half. I said he got 9 starters out of last year. Let's round it down and let's say 4. If Mike Mayock finds 4 legitimate starters in this draft, if he finds a legitimate starting cornerback, if he finds a legitimate starting safety, if he finds a legitimate starting wide receiver or 2, a legitimate outside linebacker, whatever position you want to put it in, if he finds 4 legitimate starters, what we're looking at is a team where you have 13 starters that came out of the last 2 drafts, in addition to a talented veteran quarterback, in addition to a wide receiver group that now that there's a wide receiver one out there looks pretty damn good, in addition to one of the best linebacker groups in the league despite having one of the worst in the league last year. And you're looking at something else. You're looking at Derek Carr in year 3 of a system for the first time in his career. Derek Carr, he's never made it past 2, and that's happened. I think that only happened once. I think it was just Del Rio was the only time he really had some consistency in the system. Okay, and Del Rio I know stuck around as coach in 2017, but don't forget with Del Rio there was a new offensive coordinator in town. He has had a different system for most of his career. This will be the first time that he's come in and he has had year 3 of his system. And he's going to have more familiarity with Ty Williams and Hunter Renfrow, his 2 best receivers and guys that were there for the first time last year. We're going to bring in more at the wide receiver position in this draft. He's going to have another year with Darren Waller. He's going to have another year with Josh Jacobs. He's going to have another year with Foster Moreau. Now he's got Jason Witten there too. Our tight end group is looking like one of the best in the league. This is why you trust a plan. This is why you don't start panicking and just making BS moves. This is why you don't fire a coach 3 games into the second year of his 10-year contract, okay? It doesn't turn around overnight. You don't do it in a few days. There's a plan, and right now that plan is being executed. And let me close on this. If Mike Mayock and Jon Gruden have success in the offseason of the draft this year that they did last year, then this team next year is a playoff team. And it's not just a playoff team. It's not just a squeeze into the wild card team. This is a team that can contend for a high seed. And I don't care what you say about the Chiefs. Okay, history is loaded with teams that were going to be the team to beat for the next decade that fizzled fast. And in fact, just for fun, I've been looking for a 3rd topic next week. There it is right here. Next week's 3 topics we're going to discuss, in no particular order. We're going to run a mock draft. We'll run through the other picks, but mostly we're going to focus on the Raiders, obviously. That's number 1. Number 2, we're going to tell you why the Khalil Mack trade is officially that there's no contest as to who won it anymore. There's no more debate. The debate's done. The Raiders won that trade, and we're going to do that. And the 3rd thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to tell you why all those ideas that you have, or all the ideas that you've heard that the Chiefs are just this unstoppable juggernaut for the last 10 years, we're going to do a little history lesson, because I love NFL history. We're going to go through a history lesson, and we're going to talk about every every single team that was going to be unbeatable for 10 years, and let's see what happened to some of them. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in. My name's Brian. This is Raiders in 30, the podcast for the thinking fan, coming to you from the foothills of Colorado. I'll see you all next week. Thanks for listening. Please leave comments. Please subscribe. Even if you hate the podcast, subscribe. Do it just so you can leave me comments every week about how terrible I am. I can live with it. Everyone have a great day. Stay safe. We'll see you next week.